Alas, the Tudor Era, clandestine monarchs, religious upheaval, continental warfare, and some outstandingly savage torture. While being accused in the Tudor Era may not have taken all that much, see beheading for petty theft or happening to be Catholic under the current monarch, the torture served up was pretty abhorrent. Remember, this is based on accusation. You may not have done anything wrong, and before you know it, you're tied to a torture rack, or you're being compressed in the scavenger's daughter. Maybe you undercooked the game pie, so now you're being boiled alive. You could be beheaded, you could be broken on a wheel. Hell, some accused lady had a door thrown on her. Welcome to History on Fleek. Today we look at the treatment of the accused in Tudor times. For those accused in the Tudor Era, a time on the torture rack was to be expected. Found in the infamous Tower of London, the torture rack was colloquially known as the Duke of Exeter's daughter. Throughout the 15th century, a torturer and constable of the tower was the Duke of Exeter, and he is, by legend, the creator and inventor of the rack. As for a torture method, the rack was remarkably effective. Accounts state that an accused person in Tudor times only needed to be shown the rack for a confession. However, should they not, tied up to the rack they would go, till their body was dislocated, stretched before limbs were ripped off altogether. Throughout the 16th century Reformation turmoil, the rack was a favorite of Henry VIII and Edward VI, as well as successors Queen Mary and Elizabeth I. Ow, yeah, look at that! Protestant or Catholic, Papal Authority or Church of England, the rack accepts all kinds. The accused of Tudor England stood to have their fate in the hands of some absolute sadists. A running theme of torture devices, the scavenger's daughter was another invention of a Tower lieutenant of Henry VIII's reign. The device was a twisted, distant relative of the rack. Rather than take a person's body and stretch it to breaking agony or death, this device went the other direction. It compressed a body to mush. It was known contemporarily by many as Skeffington's irons, after the man who invented it. Records of the time show very few mentions of this feverishly brutal device, suggesting it may not have come into use all that often. However, if you'd been accused in 16th century England and the questioning didn't go all that well for you, to the scavenger's daughter be you sent. The function of the device was as ingenious as inhumane. A simple iron frame in the shape of an A that could hold both heads, hands, and feet into a cramped position. The individual would have their head at the point of the A, feet at the bottom, and hands at the midpoint. A few hours to days of this, and the person was no doubt in anatomical agony. Should that not be enough for Tower lieutenants, the A-frame could be tightened, bringing even more torque on the person's body, till they would even begin to bleed from the nose and ears. Oh, charming. Ah yes, another reason to absolutely not find yourself accused of anything in the Tudor Era. The possibility of being boiled alive. Seemingly an item of overkill for a justice system that already had an entire tower dedicated to torture and murder. But yes, under Henry VIII, boiling people alive became a matter of law. Thanks to a gentleman by the name of Richard Roos, the scandal and sensation of death by poisoning flooded the English public imagination. Henry VIII was no less susceptible than the next Englishman. In fact, he was even more freaked out. During his lifetime, Holy Roman emperors had been dethroned through poisoning, and Henry didn't want the same fate. So in 1531, the Act of Poisoning was passed, and anyone guilty of poisoning another to death would be boiled alive in public. Richard Roos would be the first to go under this grim torture. He was found guilty of poisoning 2 people to death, and was publicly boiled in London in 1531. The public spectacle of this is easily the hardest part to understand. Witnesses to Roos's boiling report the crowd as shocked and feeling physically unwell from the spectacle. Nevertheless, till the law's repeal 16 years later, under Henry VIII, people were boiled. Outside of those accused of poisoning, apparently counterfeit coin makers were also subject to boiling. Hot water, molten lead, boiling oil. Tudor England made people stew out of its accused. If the authorities were onto you in Tudor era England, the torture ahead of you could be something of a pressing matter. Apologies, couldn't help myself. Presumably, a torture method that spanned the breadth of the continent. Being pressed to death was known as bien fort et dur, translated as harsh and strong punishment. This method of torture was particularly for those who refused to plead guilty or not at court. Should an accused decide to take that course of action, they would soon find themselves in a small, dark room of the nearest available prison. Therein, they would be made to lie down and have a large board placed on top of them, increasingly weighted to try and induce a plea from the accused. Yes, the accused were literally pressed to plead. The Tudors, not ones for subtlety. As you may be able to guess, this wasn't always a way of producing a plea. Sometimes it was a death sentence. In the mid-16th century, Margaret Clitheroe was pressed to death with her own front door. Boy, talk about unhinged! To be sure, one thing to avoid in the Tudor era was to be a woman facing accusations. A very special and ghastly torture was saved for the woman accused: being burnt alive. Particularly in a day and age of burning heretics and the treasonous, England would broil its dissidents for 200 years, from 1401 to 1612. Unfortunately for the English populace, they couldn't really win so much across the Tudor era. Henry VIII turned the country Protestant, so burned Catholics. His successor, Edward VI, did the same. Then Mary I turned the place Catholic and burned tons of Protestants. Then her successor, Elizabeth I, went back to burning Catholics. Ironically, in a country riddled with religious turmoil, a silent heretic keeping atheism to themselves may have been safer than a good churchgoer in Tudor England. Another grisly public display of torture, the accused were certainly doomed to a flaming death. Commonly, they would be tied to a stake placed on top of a pyre, before the heaped pile would be set ablaze in front of a baying crowd. There were supposedly different renditions of the torture depending on the mercy of the torturers. Some would wet the wood to make the process even longer. Some would tie a bag of gunpowder to the victim's neck to assure a quick death. Furthermore, some would be strangled before burning to avoid the ongoing agony. Oh, those Tudors! Torture, now with added compassion! The Tudor era would be remembered as much for its wars waged with the neighboring realms of Scotland and Ireland than any peace it fostered. However, when it came to torture, turns out the English and Scottish crowns knew how to collaborate. Being broken on the wheel was a death-inducing torture first inflicted on Robert Weir in 1603, bang in the center of Edinburgh. Being broken on the wheel was another public spectacle of brutality. The accused would be tied to a large cartwheel in front of the masses. Following this, the executioner in question would then take a plough's coulter, long, sharp, jagged thing, used to bring up the earth, to shatter the accused bones. Following this, the limbs of the accused, tied between the cartwheel spokes, would be battered till bones were shattered with a club or metal spoke. Should the executioner feel mercy, a final blow could be delivered at any time. Or, if they weren't feeling merciful, the broken, bludgeoned accused could be left in agony for days, till their death. The Tudor era had many hideous threats in store for the accused of the time, namely monarchs with a clear lust for beheading. Yes, a torture method that certainly got to the point. The Halifax gibbet was an early guillotine installed in Yorkshire during the 16th century. Around 50 people were believed to have been beheaded by the dastardly device in West Yorkshire. The elemental structure consisted of an axe head installed to the bottom of a wooden block running via a pulley. Pull the block up, place the victim's neck in its path, release the block, et voila, you have a body with no head attached. The Halifax gibbet would continue being used deep into the 17th century. It would predominantly be used against those found guilty of petty theft, and even had an Act of Parliament qualifying its usage. For certain, as an accused individual in Tudor times, one thing you did not want to be offered for your troubles was a little ease. A perversely specialized form of torture, minimalist and off-handed. It meant little more than being stuck in a single prison quarter. The prison cell in question was the basement floor of the Tower of London's White Tower. A cell with no light. It was a cube of 1.2 meters and nothing else. One couldn't sit, lie down, or stand for any duration in any form of comfort. The evil prison cell was called Little Ease because none would be found within. Unlikely to kill the participant, but no doubt scar and run them down to near ruin. It's been alleged by historians Guy Fawkes himself may have been housed there. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.